We are 36 days away from Auburn football, but Big Cat Weekend is here. And today I am joined by Justin Hokanson of Auburn Live and On 3 Sports to talk about a highly anticipated Big Cat Weekend as well as the upcoming season as a whole. And we will start with the offense. Obviously, a lot of the talk this offseason has been around the wide receivers, whether that's transfer or the guys that will be freshmen this year. But one thing that Hugh Freeze talked about over and over and over at SEC Media Days was Jarquez Hunter. And a lot of people aren't talking about him this offseason. What do you expect from the running back room? There's obviously a lot of talent returning.
Yeah, I mean, and I don't know that not talking about first of all, I don't know who everybody is. But like he was like, nobody's talking. I don't know who that is. If you're talking about Auburn specifically, though, there's probably a reason you're not talking about Jarquez, because you're talking about what's Payton Thorne going to look like, and you're talking about how are they going to fix themselves at receiver. So there's other question marks other than Jarquez. So I wouldn't take Jarquez not being talked about as a slight. I would take it as when people talk about Auburn specifically on offense, he's not a question mark. And Damari Alston's not a question mark, and Cobb, the running back room is looks pretty good. So I kind of take it like that's a pretty settled room. The other thing I'll say about Jarquez is, as good as he is, and this isn't really his fault or anything, he hasn't had a 1,000-yard season yet. Last year was his best year. He had 900 and change, 7 touchdowns or so. But, he had some games like early in the year, he missed that first game, and then he sort of sputtered a little bit early in the year. He had some games where he was 50 yards rushing and stuff. And so, I think if you look back at his last 3 years, he hasn't had a ton of big games in big games, like SEC games where he's going for $125. Some of that he was sharing time with Tank. Some of that he had offensive issues, so it's not really his fault. But I think Jarquez has got all this ability. Maybe this is the year where he really meets those expectations and can go for 1,000, 1,100 yards, has some really nice games in some big games. When Oklahoma comes to town, can he go for 105, 110 yards, stuff like that? So, but I wouldn't take it as a slight of him not being talked about. I think all the attention is on Payton Thorne and receiver, probably balanced between those two because they kind of go together. However good Payton Thorne's going to be is dependent a lot on the receivers. And obviously, if Cam Coleman's going to be what he's going to be and Keandre Lambert-Smith's going to be what he can be, Payton's got to be good and Payton's got to be accurate. So I think those two things sort of go hand in hand. I think my biggest question mark is more on the receivers than Payton. Payton to me is a guy that, going back to even off season when I'd go on shows and people talk about Payton Thorne, I always had to say, listen, did Payton make some mistakes last year? Yes, but there were so many things working against him that you don't even realize. You can see the lack of receiver talent. He didn't get there till the summer, so there's some understanding there of the offense. But it was so disjointed behind the scenes offensively. I mean, Freeze gets in there and starts calling plays. You had 2 people calling plays within the same game. You had Freeze struggling with the terminology, so he couldn't really make adjustments quickly. You had rotating quarterbacks there for a while. The playbook would change week to week. There wasn't a set identity with that offense. So there was just a bunch of stuff that even a good quarterback would struggle to navigate through that stuff, let alone a guy who just arrived in the summer and has receivers that he didn't fully trust. I think that's one of probably the things that's not talked about enough that you'll see is in this offense. It's all about timing and the relationship between the receiver and the quarterback when it comes to the RPO. If Payton reads something, he has to know that when he pulls it and throws it, that receiver is seeing the same thing he is, and that receiver is going to be exactly where they need to be. And I think there were a lot of times last year where there was a hesitation on Payton's part. Payton's a really smart football player, and I think there was a hesitation on his part a lot about, is the guy actually going to be there? Is it, or am I sure? So where you should be able to throw it and know, he maybe hesitated, waited till maybe he saw the receiver there, and then by that time maybe it's too late. Maybe he's covered again. So taking out that hesitation part and having a trust with those receivers and those guys knowing what they're supposed to do, I think that alone could be really, really, really big. And so we'll see how good Cam Coleman can be early on, Keandre Lambert-Smith. I think those are kind of your real threats, maybe your vertical threats. And then Robert Lewis is a guy in the slot. Sam Jackson's a guy in the slot. And then we'll see how Bryce Kane comes along, how Malcolm Simmons comes along. And then, of course, Perry Thompson. He comes in late, but he's got all this ability too. So some of these guys will kind of see how they catch up. But I think early on, Keandre Lambert-Smith, Robert Lewis, and Cam Coleman, and then, of course, Rivaldo as well. Those guys are going to have to carry the load when it comes to getting open and being targets for Payton.
These are people that don't follow Auburn specifically, more college football people. Hearing them say that after seeing Payton Thorne at media days, just the way that he carried himself, some of the things that he said, their perception of him changed in the span of however many hours, 3 hours that Auburn's there. Did you, you follow the program closely. Did you get that vibe of, this is kind of a rebirthed Payton Thorne at media days, or was that what you've, been seeing since, I guess, the end of last season?
That's the same Payton I've always known. And that's not I'm not taking a shot at anybody who that may have been their observation. I would assume those are people that have not been around him, that didn't know him when he arrived, that didn't speak to him last year, and that weren't around him. Maybe they just saw him for the first time, or maybe that they had only spoken to him. Maybe they'd only seen him on TV or something in the past. It's the same Payton I've always known Payton to be. I talked to him on a podcast last summer, shortly after he arrived. And from that moment, he was the same guy he was at media days, which is, a cool, calm, collected guy, confident, smart, not too high, not too low. He's just, to me, he's kind of a guy that has his priorities straight, and is a smart football player. Didn't all come together last year, but I think he's capable. Like, does he have a ceiling? Yeah, but I think he's capable of leading a really efficient offense. Like, is it going to be an offense that's capable of scoring 40 points a game? Probably not. But he's capable of doing some really good things and setting Auburn up to win a lot of football games. But I remember talking to him, and like one of the first questions he was asked in the big room was, somebody said, "Hey, Hugh said that he's really confident. He has a lot of confidence in you. How does that make you feel?" Or maybe it was something along the lines of, Hugh feels like maybe you're coming into your own or something. And Payton said, "I don't know, man. I've been the same the whole time. I'm the same guy I was." And I believe that. I think last year was a struggle, but I think Payton's got his head on straight. It helps coming from a family where his dad was an offensive coordinator in college. His granddad was a coach in football. Like, he comes from a coaching family, and he just approaches the game like a pro. He approaches the game that way and studies film that way. And so I saw the same guy. I think it's just got to translate to the field. The preparation in the film room translates to the field. But I don't think there was ever a point where Payton doubted himself, even going back to last fall. I think, are there things he could have done better? Yes. But I think, boy, there was a lot of things around him that were not working correctly that he had to try to figure out and work through that nobody could see. There's just stuff that happens where a defender could do something different. I'm not going to throw anybody under the bus, but there were plenty of instances last year where a receiver should have run a specific route. Maybe it was a 5-yard slant, and instead the receiver looked at the thing wrong and ran a 3-yard slant. Well, that changes the whole timing of the play. And then Payton throws behind. Well, whose fault is that? That's not Payton's fault. What you don't know is that the receiver ran a route that was 2 yards short of what he should have run. There's a lot of instances like that that you don't see unless you know the exact play and what the audible's being called and all that stuff. So anyway, all that to say, I think he's the same guy. I think he's very confident in what he's capable of doing. And so I didn't really see like a new Payton Thorne necessarily.
Going off what you said about, sometimes there is some hesitation from receivers. Obviously, we have a very new receiver room this year. How much better do you think Payton has to be for us to see a decent improvement in the offense this season because of the talent brought in?
I think there's definitely things he can improve on. He talked about that a little bit, about footwork. And you can always be more accurate. He definitely threw some balls last year. The pick six in the Vanderbilt game, the pick six or the interception in the Maryland game. Like, there were some throws he made last year that were on him. Like, he didn't see something, whatever, and he just threw it right to a defender. And it was not great. But it's just so, I just tell people, like, it's so hard to judge him because of all of the issues, the collective of issues last year. He needs to be a little better, but it was just in that offense, it's so hard to judge exactly what's his fault, what's not his fault, how bad was he not, because of all the things that have to come together. So I think the biggest thing for him is another year of understanding the offense, what's going to be expected. He mentioned another thing that's really important that I think is maybe underplayed. And he talked about how last year when Hugh arrived, Hugh spent a lot of time in the summer out, donor events, booster events, and he wasn't around a lot. And that's not a knock on Hugh Freeze. When you're a new coach, you got a lot of things to do. And so he talked about like not really being able to meet with him. And on top of that, Hugh wasn't super involved early on in the offense anyway. And he talked about how different that is this year with Hugh not only being involved, understanding the terminology, but also now that you've met the donors, you've shook hands, you've kind of done a lot of that. And Hugh did do some speaking engagements, but he was around the complex a lot more this summer. Hugh talked about it. Payton talked about it. They meet every single week. That didn't happen last summer. So imagine how more prepared Payton should be going into the year when you've had a chance to meet with you on a weekly basis about anything and everything going into the season. Whereas at this point last year, Payton probably didn't even know everybody on the team and didn't even understand the whole playbook. And now he's been meeting with Hugh Freeze every week. Like it's a year has done a lot of good, I think, for him and what you should expect from him. But the expectations now need to be raised for him a little bit because the excuses aren't really going to be there anymore.
A lot of fans, and myself included, have very unrealistic expectations. I like to think that we'll go undefeated every season, and that obviously, is never going to happen. But what do you think would be considered, considering all things, the rebuild of the program being a big part of it, what do you think a realistic expectation is for this season in terms of wins and losses? And what do you think a ceiling and sadly a floor would be?
I think there's a couple of ways you can answer this. Like, to me, it's sort of a combination. So you could just say, well, I want to see more wins than 6. 7-5 would be better than 6-6. But if 7-5, if you look at Auburn's schedule, 4 non-conference games, right? 4 non-conference games, and then you've got Arkansas, Vanderbilt, you're going to be favored in, and then A&M at home is pretty much going to be a push. So if you could go 7-5 and pretty much just meet the expectations. You won the ones you should, you lose the ones you should have. Would Auburn fans be happy with that? Because, by the way, that would also be 3-5 in the SEC, and that's not acceptable. So I think it's a combination of doing better than 6-6 obviously needs to happen, but I think this team needs to beat somebody, and in addition to that, like not lose. If you can't trade, like if you tell Auburn fans, well, you'll beat Oklahoma, but you're going to lose to A&M at home at the end of the year, or somebody's going to upset you. You're going to go, Vanderbilt's going to upset you, Arkansas. I don't know. Would they trade? Then it's just a trade. We won one. It's like last year. You played Georgia and Alabama close, and then you lost to New Mexico State. So like that can't happen. I think a successful year is winning the ones you should win and then beating somebody you shouldn't. If that happens, I think you're at 8 wins, which would be a 2-win improvement over last year. It would be over what most people expect, which is 7-ish wins if you won 8. And most likely, if you win one you're not supposed to, and I'm not counting A&M, even if A&M's like a couple point favorite, that's at home. That's pretty much even. Let's say Oklahoma or whatever. That's probably a ranked team. Oklahoma, Missouri, that'd be a ranked win. That's something they haven't done since 2021. Auburn beat Ole Miss at home, who was ranked 10th at the time. They've not beaten a ranked team since then. So I think it's a combination of winning the ones you should, and then also showing that you're now to the point where you can beat somebody you shouldn't, and you can beat a ranked team, and you can actually close a game out and not just play pretty tight or play pretty close. Like you can beat them for the four quarters into the game. You beat them. I think that's where it's at. So I think this program needs a breakthrough. I mean, it has been. You got to go back to 2019 was the last time they had a really good season. And so to me, this program needs a breakthrough, and to me, that would be 8 wins. That would be winning the 7 you should, which is your 4 non-conference, beat Vandy, beat Arkansas, beat A&M, and then upset somebody, whether it's Oklahoma, whether it's Kentucky, even Kentucky. I mean, on the road, you're probably going to be – you could be a couple-point underdog. We'll see how the season's going at that point, but that's a road game that a lot of people might not pick you to win. So I would toss that in there along with Missouri. Win one of those that you're not supposed to win. Get to 8 wins. Don't have a collapse like New Mexico State. That's where this program needs to be. To me, that needs to be the floor. 7-5 in not having a ranked win again for the 3rd year in a row, I don't think that needs to be the expectation. I mean, I just think you're slipping in terms of making expectations if that's where you set it. That's not where Auburn football should be, and that's not why Hugh Freeze was hired.
The first 5 games are all at home, which the schedule is just kind of weird this year. But I think the way that I look at it is the first 4 games, I think, should build the confidence of some of the younger guys that are going to play a big role. And then Oklahoma is, going to be a big game, the first game that will probably draw a lot of excitement. How much impact do you think, if they were to go 5-0, how much of a benefit would that be? Obviously a big one, you're undefeated, but just for the confidence and the excitement around the program.
Yeah, it'd be huge. And I was gonna pull up I was pulling up their schedule just to see exactly what was behind that, just to make sure. I think a lot is being made of that Oklahoma game. You look at what's right behind it. I mean, you got Georgia the next week on the road, a week off, at Missouri, at Kentucky. The whole month of October, you don't play at home. But immediately after that game, you've got 3 on the road. So it's big in the sense that if you don't get that, you could very well be 0-4 in the league. Georgia, Missouri, and Kentucky are on the road after. So if you don't beat Oklahoma, you absolutely could be going into November 0-4 in the SEC. And there'll be a lot of pressure at that point. A lot of pressure. You wouldn't have played a home game. You'd have a 4-game losing streak. Like, there would be a lot of people talking and a lot of pressure. Recruiting could be a struggle at that point. Like, losing Oklahoma could be big because of what's behind you now. If you lost Oklahoma and came back and upset Missouri on the road, well, that changes everything, right? But I think it's a big one. Also, just because of what I talked about, they haven't had a ranked win in so long. Oklahoma will be ranked. If they could right off the bat win their very first SEC game against Oklahoma, all this hoopla, Oklahoma's first SEC road game, there will be a lot of national attention on that game, a lot of eyeballs watching. If they pulled that off early in the season, I think it would give the team a bunch of confidence. Not just kind of the overall outlook of the season, but I think you would inject some confidence in this team that, okay, all this sort of belief that we think we're back or we think we're going to take a step this year, we are going to take that step. We just beat a team that we were the underdog against, a ranked team, a good Oklahoma team, all the hype around Big 12, them coming into the league. I think it would inject a bunch of confidence into the team. So there's two reasons I think that game's big. One, it injects confidence into that team, and maybe then, maybe they walk into Missouri going, why aren't we going to win this game? And then just meeting your goals that season. If you lose that one, you're going to have to come back, and I think if you lose that one, you're going to have to come back and either upset. You're going to have to upset Kentucky. I forgot about Arkansas, by the way. I'm sorry. Arkansas is right before Oklahoma, so you could be
right.
You could be 1-4. Same thing applies. If you lose Oklahoma, you could be looking at a 4-game losing streak. So if you lose that one, then you're like, we got to go to, assuming you're going to beat Vanderbilt, and even if you came back and beat A&M at home, that's only 3 conference wins. You really would have to go on the road to Missouri and Kentucky and upset one of those teams on the road to get to 500 in the league. So it just puts a lot of pressure on the rest of the season if you don't win, if you don't beat Oklahoma.
Shifting to Big Cat Weekend, which I guess kind of starts today, but the main event of it will be tomorrow afternoon. Most Auburn fans are well aware of what this is, but if some are a little confused by it, or if there's a fan of another school listening, can you just give us a little detail about what some consider the biggest recruiting weekend for Auburn football is?
Yeah, well, I tweeted earlier on Friday, Big Cat Weekend, for anybody that just sort of got into following Auburn recruiting in the last handful of years, or I don't know where everybody was in 2009. but that's where this started. I mean, Gene Chizik, Curtis Looper, who was the running back coach at the time, Trooper Taylor is a receivers coach. They came up with this idea in 2009. The first Big Cat was May of 2009, and it was genius. I mean, here we are, 2024, and it's still ongoing. It was really an idea ahead of its time to sort of go, let's create this recruiting event that's just one day. Some kids will arrive and maybe stay Friday night, but it's really show up Saturday morning, hang out all day, leave Saturday afternoon. It's not meant to be some big football heavy day, like tour the facilities and talk to the coaches and watch film. It's not really meant to be that. It's meant to be a fun day of hanging out. They'll probably play some games. They'll probably play some EA Sports college football. Like, that's kind of the whole point. And it's why when you see who's coming, it's pretty much every Auburn commit that can be there is going to be there. And then you bring in as many other high profile recruits as you can. So the goal is it's a fun day. You've got a bunch of commits that then can help you recruit some of these very top targets. That's what it is. It's literally Big Cat Weekend is the biggest guys on your board for this year, 25, and next year, 26. So it goes back, man. It's you can go back through the years, and a lot of commits have come from Big Cat. A lot of commits later on have come from prospects that were at Big Cat that make relationships, and it sets the tone, and they commit later on. So it's big. It's the last. I mean, look, football starts on August 1st. Camp starts. So this is kind of the last chance to get all these kids together, have a Saturday, because after this it's fall camp, and then your two official visits, which are, you know, very structured, and you're visiting the facilities and you watch the game, and it's just kind of the last hangout. Get some kids, get their parents, relax, and have that kind of weekend. So it should be a good weekend. I think Auburn had a bunch of momentum early on, probably in the spring, lost a little bit of momentum maybe the last 2 months, which Hugh Freeze kind of joked about with us at media days when we talked to him before he hit the big stage. Some of the local media, when we talked to him, he kind of joked about sending a text to Will Redmond, who's the GM, like, hey, what's going on, you know? And so I think they felt a little pressure, had a couple of decommitments and a couple of guys go other places that they had some momentum with. So it's a big weekend to try to regain some momentum, and I think they'll do that. Like, I think between Saturday when prospects leave, trickling on to maybe Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, I think they're going to get quite a few commitments, both in the 25 and 26 class. Like, there will be really some really important additions, I think, in both those classes, but specifically the 25. So you'll see action on Saturday, but it won't be done, I think, Sunday, Monday. There could be a couple more that trickle out after, you know, in the aftermath of Big Cat Weekend.
As far as I'm aware, there will not be a 2025 quarterback in Auburn this weekend. How much of an effect do you think that has on players that Auburn's recruiting very hard or trying to flip? Just the question mark that is who will be Auburn's quarterback in 2025?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. I mean, I think ideally, they wanted to have a quarterback committed before the season started or before fall camp started. For a number of reasons. There's a little bit more that goes into recruiting a quarterback. It's a big decision. It's one you want to get right. There's a lot more NIL discussions around a quarterback because every quarterback wants, you know, the world. And so I think there was some pressure there to get a quarterback committed and to help recruit the rest of the class. Quarterbacks have that unique role of recruiting, helping recruit your class. They can pretty much call anybody and go, I'm the quarterback. I'm committed. I'm in. And so why aren't you? And so those guys can really play a unique role in recruiting other players as well. And so we've heard a bunch of names, right? There was, I can't even remember the guy that committed to A&M early on. And so they've sort of been in the hunt for a few. And then you've got somebody like Deuce Knight, who's committed to Notre Dame, or you've got KJ Lacey, who's committed to Texas. You got Juju Lewis, who's committed to Southern Cal. So all these names sort of going around, and it kind of looks like maybe they won't have a commitment from a quarterback by the time the season starts or we get into fall camp. I'm not sure. I mean, they're working hard. I don't know if any of these guys are going to be at Big Cat Weekend. They tried. Deuce Knight, probably the last week, 2 weeks, he has sort of risen up to be, I think, kind of their top quarterback target, but he's committed to Notre Dame. So until you can kind of pry him away from his Notre Dame commitment, We don't know where things stand. Juju Lewis is pretty much all an NIL deal, whether it's USC, Colorado, Auburn. NIL is kind of running the show there. So it's kind of complicated. It's sort of a roller coaster because of that. And so I don't think Auburn's out of it. That's sort of on the back burner at this point. I don't think that is where Hugh Freeze's priority is at the moment. But it's not completely dead. I think some things would have to happen for that to sort of simmer to get going again. But as of right now, it's kind of on the back burner. Maybe it could happen, maybe not, but it's not the priority. Deuce Knight seems to be kind of the priority. KJ Lacey a little bit too. So we'll see if they can try to make something happen before fall camp gets rolling and the season starts. But right now, it looks like they could go into the season without a quarterback committed yet.
When should fans, or I don't want to say start to panic, but at what point does not having a quarterback commit become a large issue? Obviously, like you said, they wanted to have their guy before the season started, but should there be concern right now, or do you kind of, push the brake on getting too worried yet?
Yeah, I wouldn't be concerned yet. I mean, here's what I would say in general. Recruiting is always crazy. The NIL world, though, the rise of NIL has put that in overdrive. I mean, no recruitment's ever dead now, especially if you're a program and that's the guy you want, especially Auburn and Hugh Freeze and the way they're recruiting. With NIL involved, all it takes is just a better offer. I mean, it's not like you got to trump a relationship or proximity to home, sometimes maybe, but with NIL, if a prospect, if a large part of the recruitment is NIL, things can change on a dime. So, there's no reason to really panic at this point for Auburn's recruiting. And in terms of a quarterback, there's a few that they targeted, they've shifted their focus. There's still some really good players out there. I would say the only concern is, and it's completely hypothetical, if you get into the season and the offense isn't hitting the way you thought, for whatever reason, you thought this offense was going to be different. You thought Hugh Freeze, Derek Nix, we're going to get things cranking now. And then you get into the season and it's still sputtering for whatever reason. That potentially could be used against you. But at the same time, you could use it and say, see how bad we need you. See how bad we need a quarterback. But that would kind of be my only thing. Once you get into the season, in the summer, you can pitch anything and everything. Once you get into the season, if things aren't going the way you need them to go and you're not winning games, then there's a little bit of negative juice there that you have to overcome. Not that it can't be overcome. So, and you just get later. I mean, now with the early signing period, it gets real quick when these kids will start shutting things, especially quarterbacks. I mean, if they start their high school season, a lot of them could shut things down and go, I want to focus on my season, and then I'm going to sign early. So you run the risk there too of it's kind of your last July, August kind of is your last opportunity to maybe have their full attention. And then they may just go, all right, I'm good. I'm committed to where I'm at, or I'm going to go somewhere else. And now I'm going to focus on my season and then sign early. So I think this July, August is important for that reason as well, to try to get one. So I wouldn't panic yet, but if you're September, October and you don't have a quarterback, and maybe some of these guys you're targeting have locked things down with where they're at, then you're like, okay, who's going to be the guy?
All right, that will do it for our season preview. You can follow Justin on Twitter at _JHokanson. And where can they find all your work? I mean, there will be a lot going on tomorrow with it being Big Cat Weekend, but throughout the season and off season as well.
Yeah, auburnlive.com. We got Jeffrey Lee and Cole Pinkston who do an awesome job with our recruiting coverage. So go to auburnlive.com. It's always $1 for the first month. So there's literally not a better time than right now. If you went and signed up today, Saturday, you're going to get Big Cat coverage, and then you get all of fall camp. You get all of August for $1. There's not a better time to sign up for auburnlive.com and subscribe. And I think once you do, you'd be stuck. So just go check us out, man. We'd really appreciate it.